What if all of the VR content we created over the last decade could work without a VR headset? Just a monitor sitting on your desk. Today on the Dauntless podcast, we're talking about a way you can step into VR worlds, but without all of the Velcro head straps, without the motion sickness, and with no barriers for friends, kids, or your customers. Our guest this week is Greg Fodor, and he is the founder of PortalVR. Portal is a system that lets you reach into fully fledged VR games and experiences using a glasses-free display. In our conversation, we get into exactly how it works, what it means for developers who want to reach a 20-to-1 larger audience beyond headsets, and why decoupling virtual reality from the hardware might be the biggest unlock that the industry has seen in years. If you've ever felt like VR is just too early or too hard to share with the people around you, this conversation will change how you think about what's possible. Let's get into it. Greg, thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time to be here. As someone who's been in the XR industry for a while, how did you get into XR?
I did a lot of work in college in computer graphics, and computer graphics was always kind of like my passion. But I came out of college and I went into ad tech and e-commerce and all these other things unrelated to that. I worked at Etsy for a while, and I kind of ended my time there. And I was in this position where I could kind of just like explore things. And that was right when the DK1 came out. So I basically got that, the Oculus DK1. I got that, and I was like looking at the Tuscany demo, and I was just like, okay, I have to work on this. I don't know what I'm going to do yet, but I have to work on this and go back to my roots in computer graphics. And I wanted to work on something that was, kind of somewhere between gaming and just general utility. I remember attending the SVB Expo, the very first one, and there were all kinds of cool things. Like I remember there were people working on like VR exercise, and like there were a couple of social VR things. We weren't even calling it social VR yet. It was like, it didn't have a name yet. It was like VR communication or something. I ended up getting connected with Eric, who had started Altspace, and that basically like really hooked me. I was really excited about what they were doing, so I started working on that.
Love how many people, when we've asked this question, the DK1 is what brought them into the ecosystem. That's like true early adopter. What prompted you to, after your experience with Altspace VR, go start another XR company with PortalVR?
I kind of was at Altspace for a while, and then I worked at Mozilla on a kind of similar product called Mozilla Hubs, they were both social VR applications. Around COVID, I tried to bootstrap another product that was kind of in between VR and non-VR that was called Gel. And that was focused on remote work because, a lot of us were working remotely, and I was trying to figure that out. For that, I took a bit of a hiatus. I have 2 young kids, and they were kind of getting old enough where I started to think like, wow, I really want them to be able to play all this VR stuff. You can't put a headset on a 5-year-old, right? It just doesn't even make any sense at that age. And so I started just thinking like, well, are there ways that I could basically get this content working for them, that they could play it? One thing led to the other. And it all started with that motivation, which was like, how can I bring this amazing content that we've made for so long, the last 10 or more years, and increase the access to it, starting with my own kids. But it turns out there's a lot of people that actually want to be able to use it without wearing a headset. So that was kind of what pulled me back into the industry.
And we heard a little bit about what PortalVR is and what it does. Do you want to give us like a quick rundown?
PortalVR, my company and my product are trying to answer the question, is there another way to use virtual reality content in a way that's fun, compelling, and useful without having to wear anything on your face, especially a heavy headset? Because, there's been a lot of kind of drag on the industry because of the tight coupling between headsets and the content. The current product, I think, actually is a pretty compelling alternative to use all VR content, as is, without having to wear a headset. And so the way it works is that the best experience is you will use a new glasses-free auto-stereoscopic display like the Samsung Odyssey 3D monitor, and you'll have that on your desk. And then you right now tether your mobile VR headset to your PC, and that enables your controllers. So you can use your controllers with your 3D monitor. And then there's an additional kind of control scheme that I'd come up with that allows you to seamlessly use the controllers in the game and also control the camera so that you can look around very easily and kind of navigate the space visually as you normally do in VR. And so this kind of system is the result of many months of, crazy experiments and talking to people. The net is that, I can give this to somebody, and in a few minutes, once they've kind of gotten used to it, they're able to play like many, many VR games, and they can definitely use like experiences like Google Earth, and like the Blue is the one I like having my kids use. There actually is this other modality for VR that's available to us now. But the implications of that obviously are pretty huge if that's true, right? It means that all of the content going all the way back to the early days suddenly now is available to people in this new modality. And because the modality drops the requirement of wearing a headset, there's just many, many implications of that regarding like, access to the content, or just context in which you can use it that you couldn't have used it before.
I can attest the 5-year-old in a VR headset is a tough one. My 5-year-old always wants to get into my Quest every time I bring it out.
When you have a 5-year-old or even like a slightly older kid wearing a headset as a parent, like every second of that, you're just like, I don't know, this seems like it should not be okay. Like this seems like this is potentially hurting them, or I don't know what they're seeing, right? It's just every level as a parent, you're like, this is not good. This is not what I want to be happening right now. But like you said, like there's no stopping them. So you basically have to like let them do a little bit. Having this other way where it is, I have it set up on a 3D monitor at home, and it's actually quite cool. Like it's kind of magical in its own right? It's like another kind of magic next to the VR headset. And so, my 5-year-old loves it. The control scheme is very simple, right? You basically just, if you touch the axis stick on the controller using the capacitance touch sensor, then the controller turns into, I call it like a 3D trackball. So you basically can like look around using your hand, and you can translate their hand. And that's perfectly doable for a 5-year-old. You can give them just one controller, and they can put their finger on it, and they can use both of their hands to move the camera around. And it's in 3D in front of them. And so, a big part of what makes, I think, gaming really interesting for especially young kids is this is like a unique area where they have like agency. They can basically do what they want. So giving, a child the ability to navigate a 3D space like this on a look-through display into kind of a magical world is a pretty new and amazing place for them to be able to try and do things. And so, all that stuff is just super exciting for me as both a parent and also somebody that's developing a new way for people to use VR.
In passing, you might think, why would you want to be able to use VR without a headset? And as we have been getting more and more people through the different experiences that we have built out, there is a staggering number of people that want to use VR, but for whatever reason, don't want to put a headset on their face. We're talking about having VR experiences at conferences, or if you're at at some kind of like trade show and you want to show people. There are lots of people who would love to do VR, but in that moment don't want to put a headset on their face that something like this is perfect for. Or if you wear glasses and you're like, I just don't feel like dealing with that right now. Or this isn't my VR headset that has my prescription lenses in it. I don't want to do that. It's actually staggering once you get into it, how many people can use something like Portal that you maybe wouldn't think of if you're kind of new to the industry or just, kind of passing through.
A lot of the work I did last year, I would say maybe 80 or 90% of it was in a period where I hadn't actually figured out a real solution yet. So I had half solutions, right? And you guys were really kind to talk to me even earliest in the process where it was barely working, right? And now I'm kind of in this like really fun part where now I think the solution is actually very good. And I can actually start to see, right, all these additional use cases coming up, not because I'm coming up with them, but because I have people trying it and their light bulb is going on and they're being like, oh, this, and this. Like I'm headed up to a VR lab today that does a lot of stuff with college students. And like, I'm excited to just see, like, I'm actually going to have to bring the monitor with me, right? Because that's one thing. It's like kind of like VR where like you have to see it, right, in person to get it for the 3D part at least. But yeah, it's been like really cool to start to get those insights happening when people start to connect the dots of all the things that it can really help them with. And it's just cool, right? I mean, I think that's like part of the reason I like working in VR. I was at CES a couple of weeks ago, and I was actually able to demo PortalVR in a suite with a company that does 3D displays. And their suite was a bunch of demos of these like new 3D displays. And it was, like I said, I hadn't been in the VR industry for a while, and this was one of the first real like demos I was able to do since I started working on PortalVR. And it just reminded me how awesome it is that we get to work in a space where you can just bring people into a room and you just hit them with one mind-blowing thing after the next. And they kind of like walked out kind of like dazed, like they just can't believe any of that stuff was real. And, this stuff is, the auto-stereoscopic technology now has gotten to a point where it really is magic. Like when it's done correctly, like when both the hardware is good and the software is good, right? Kind of like what you were saying, where like you had a lot of VR experiences in the early days where you would get sick because the game designers were still figuring out what the right mechanics were. This is actually also the case I've found for some of these 3D displays where, you have to be really kind of careful of like not setting the depth too deep, and the projection matrix has to be right, because people, they'll look up and you'll be like, oh, they look a little cross-eyed. That probably wasn't right, So basically it's still in that early stage and for some of the experiences, but I've worked really hard, and particularly like by building on top of the existing VR ecosystem, a lot of that kind of goes for free because a lot of that that tuning was done. But a lot of companies that are like bringing stuff for the first time here can run into trouble like that. But yeah, it's just been really cool to like show this to people and to basically get that wow moment. Or sometimes they even like say things I can't say on a podcast. It's like they'll use a few swear words because they couldn't believe this was possible to do. And that's what I really like about this industry, is you get those moments.
There is so much about this tech that just feels like science fiction made real, that is just so fun, and I think keeps so many of us in it, even though every 6 months some major news publication likes to tell us the technology is dead, and we're like, no, it's just because it's not as ubiquitous as a cell phone doesn't mean it doesn't have a role in use cases. Why they should use Portal to make their content available in a different medium besides a headset. How do you help them distinguish between Portal VR versus PC gaming or PC content interaction?
Well, it's funny because when I had my PC launch, back in December, and I took a video of myself like playing it on my desk, and it caused this like giant, I'll say, debate on X about this. And I think it's kind of fun because it kind of gets to this fundamental question of like, what exactly is VR? Like when you say VR, what does that mean, right? And now arguing about the definition of that is like not really that useful, but it does get to like a deeper question of like, what's the value we're bringing users, and like, what are they actually able to do with VR that they couldn't do before? What are they able to experience that they couldn't experience before, right? One way to answer that question is that, you have all 3 of these things kind of coupled together right now in a virtual reality experience. You have perception, right? Being able to see in 3D. You have full immersion. So you have the visual and kind of innate presence experience of being somewhere else. And then you have the use of your body, right, in the gameplay, like using their hands, using your body to move around and that kind of thing. And those have all kind of been like tightly coupled together, right? There's been like little experiments here and there with motion controls over the years. I mean, the Wii was actually like a pretty big moment when there was a lot of motion control, and then there was the Kinect, right? But overall, like, the VR ecosystem has built content that couples these 3 things tightly together, that it turns out actually the coupling isn't necessarily as tight as we all thought. You actually can get a lot of value out of the content if you just slightly loosen that and take the user from being inside the world to putting them outside of the world, but able to reach into it, right? And so I think for developers, I don't think there's going to be a lot of work that they need to do if they wanted to say make a game, right, that was like designed around Portal VR's experience. They actually already are there in a lot of cases, and in a few cases, maybe a little bit of work could be done to improve it. This is, I think, an important conversation for the industry to have, and to just for the artists and the creative people in the industry to start thinking about, because the ratio between the number of people that have used and want to continue to use headsets and the wider gaming ecosystem, or just the wider computer ecosystem, right, for utility and use cases that aren't gaming, it's on the order of like 20 or 100 to 1 or something crazy, right? So if you can get to a point where the medium of using your hands, the medium of using depth perception and spatial reasoning and all of that, if that medium can actually get over that wall of being tied to this head-mounted display method, that will have a massive impact on the world. Like, it will mean that all of this stuff that we've kind of been very much passionate about, lots and lots of it will be able to translate to like the broader public in a way that it couldn't have been able to do before.
One of the things you mentioned was, and I think you can only really understand this as a founder, but the kind of weird joy you get when a customer comes up to you and explains to you how to use your product. They're so excited.
I mean, at the end of the day, right? Like, if you're building a company, your primary goal is to get people to think new thoughts, right? Like, at the end of the day, if I can get things into a position where this idea becomes self-evident in the minds of people in the VR industry, like, oh, obviously this is how it should have worked, or obviously this is how it works, present tense, like, that's actually means that I was like maximally successful. One other thing that's actually really interesting about the kind of place I landed with this, that you have the like looking backwards view, which is like, okay, there's all these phones and tablets and PCs, and now maybe those are now part of the story, right, for VR in the way they weren't before. But what's kind of crazy ironic is that there's also this whole other forward-looking thing with this. And so I already mentioned the 3D displays, right? That's a pretty good example where like that technology is basically just now maturing. It's now available to consumers. It's pretty much brand new. Like you go to show anybody of this and they have no idea that it exists, right? Half the time. But the other thing that's super ironic is that, there's a lot of these AR gaming glasses and even AR glasses that are, for at least the near term, going to have like FOV constraints or like different kind of trade-offs, right? To get the low weight design goals of these glasses. And the great irony of it all is that having this methodology where you're actually looking through a fixed portal, right? That's like basically a look through box in the case of a monitor, or it could be a circle. If that actually works for VR, just gives VR an amazing springboard to actually bring all of that content to these glasses, right? Which is also kind of like where the industry feels like it's heading. And a lot of the assumption is like, well, that means like if we're moving towards these glasses, that means there's going to be this like, like zero sum negative impact on the VR ecosystem. But in fact, this modality seems to be pointing towards a way where that's actually not zero sum. That just means that this is going to be another way for you to use all the existing VR content.
Something we encountered with the with Microsoft HoloLens, when you needed to talk to someone, you just like flipped it up and they could look at you like normal. It made that headset so much more usable because it didn't freak people out. Like,
yeah,
they didn't have to wonder, like, what were you looking at? Like, was there something up on the screen? Because you just moved it out of the way. I am sad that that isn't as common in other headsets, the ability to do that. I mean, like with the Apple Vision Pros, they went in the other direction and they were like, we will simulate your eyes in this kind of freaky screen situation. Not that I have anything against the AVPs. It's just, not the direction I would have gone in personally.
And that's funny about you pointing at that. I don't know if you ever saw any of my like speculative tweets about what before the Apple Vision Pro was announced. And it was kind of funny because I went into this headspace where I thought I had actually kind of just from like induction figured out like what they were going to do because they're Apple, right? And it's funny in retrospect, but it's exactly what you're pointing at, which was I thought, basically for a mainstream VR headset to become a kind of staple device people use right all day, it felt to me like there was this unique thing you could try, which was you have a VR headset that isn't intended to be used all day, but is intended to be worn all day, right? And so a flip-up VR device has the ingredients of what it would take to have a device that you could theoretically wear all day in the off position, right? But then use it for like 4 hours a day or something, right? And so I had convinced myself that Apple was basically creating the first like visor like that you could wear that would be like this really slick hat that they would design that would be like, perfectly weighted. And then, it basically like when it was up, it would be like a legit like cool hat to wear all day. And then you would flip it down to use the VR part. That was not right, obviously, but it does make me excited. Like, Lynx, at least their new headset coming out still retains the hinge on that. I have one of their headsets. I haven't used it all that much, but I kind of was always joking that like I would spend a weekend basically trying to turn it into a cool looking visor just to see if I could walk around with it up and like not feel completely like a geek. I think it's an area that nobody's really explored honestly at all yet. So it might be like a way to kind of leapfrog over the whole other constraints that are there around, all day use. Because I think a lot of people think, oh, you wear this VR headset all day, but that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I mean, once I thought of that, I started noticing just how many people around where I live are wearing baseball caps. Because like you think this, you're like, nobody wears visors, but then I'm like, actually no, like tons of people wear baseball caps all day long. Maybe they have like an actual cap that's like where you put a lot of the batteries or something, because then you can distribute all of that weight. So like, this is how my brain works. Like I'm just like thinking, oh my God, like this has got to be what they're doing. But yeah, that's a whole underexplored design space. There's probably tons of problems with it, obviously, but like that was always an interesting thing I thought would be cool to see somebody try to do.
It's like if someone took Daiquiri's approach and said, take it out of enterprise, take it to consumer. I don't know if you remember Daiquiri. They were integrated into hard hats. It was so cool. Apple. Since we've always been kind of
Yeah,
industrial enterprise XR, they were on our
hmm
radar, but they unfortunately are one of the XR companies in the XR graveyard. I don't even remember who acquired their IP, but maybe it was Apple.
maybe.
It was one of the bigger ones in the space. I wear visors all the time because I have a lot of hair. And if I want to have like a ponytail or, anything, a bun, I can't do that with a baseball cap. And I live in Texas, so like you need
Yeah,
some sun protection. I have many visors. If you looked at
There
my
you go.
closet, you'd be like, oh, an 80-year-old woman lives here. Great.
Well, so when you get your Lynx R2, right, I expect you to run this experiment.
I was, as you were saying it, I'm like, I bet I could 3D print some stuff to make it fashion, like
I
add
know, this is
some.
where my mind went as well. I was just like,
I mean,
it's so
it's
cool.
always easy for us to criticize the hardware releases in retrospect. It'll be interesting to see moving forward what comes out. I hope it's more visor based, right? Where it stays on you but can be removed from your natural field of view, and more in the sunglasses style, right? So
Yeah.
it's maybe not as lightweight as glasses, but it's something that you would reach for like you would your sunglasses when you need it for a specific thing. So I
Makes
think that's
sense.
the direction things are going. I just hope they keep going that way.
It's really interesting how like a lot of the stuff feels like it's vibes, right? Because it's like from first principles, a lot of the waves in the VR industry really were, it's just like expectations being reality to some degree. But at the end of the day, like the thesis has always been the same. Like that's not really changed. It's the timing has been a little bit slower, but there's this sentiment now that like because of a few changes at Meta, like relatively small changes to be honest with you, right? In the grand scheme of things, that it's like a shift to the fundamental value proposition of the medium and the hardware and everything.
When you're thinking about the long term of where you think VR will go, XR will go from both the content and the hardware side, where does Portal VR fit into it? What's your long-term goals and visions for what you're building now?
So as an entrepreneur, you always paint the most ridiculous picture of the future because you're like, okay, this is where like everything I thought was true is true. And it works out. I actually genuinely think that if the thing I'm working on, is able to kind of grow into what it can become, that you'll see that 90% of daily active use of VR content will be through this modality, and headset use will be like somewhere around 10% or maybe less. The overall pie will be much bigger because of that new modality. It will break through and basically give a release valve to all of this back pressure on the industry. So you'll see like this entire ecosystem growing, but you'll see the slice, basically being like thinner and thinner proportions headsets, because basically this modality gets a lot of that stuff out of the way. Whether it's for fun or for utility, the headsets turn out to be not essential as part of that. So the trade-offs are like really starkly in favor of my modality for a lot of the time. And so that's, I think, the on the metric side. In the long term, I want people to use computers where interacting with a virtual environment, like with your hands, feeling like they're looking into it or you're in it, is just like a normal thing that people do all the time. Like it's just like a thing that is like part of the way we use computing. Eventually you'll have your AI people living in that world, probably, right? But it's just this normalization of this medium that we've kind of had in this little box, so to speak, because of the drag factor of headsets. That medium deserves to be part of computing in general. And in fact, it's been kind of like the elephant in the room. There was a period there where like everyone's like, well, yeah, we're all going to be in the metaverse or whatever. The elephant in the room was like, there's just human beings that physically can't do that. Like at a very, very basic level, if there was going to be its own medium that was available to all humans, there was always going to need to be another way to use it that was not going to be tied to that specific hardware design. And so I think making that medium be part of the ecosystem along like a pure medium to everything else we use digital computing for is ultimately the goal of this.
Could you tell us a little bit about how developers can use Portal to do just that, to get more people into their experiences?
For individual VR developers, right, there's a pretty obvious pain point. That's like, it's like somewhat alleviated by existing tools, but not really, which is just being able to like test and show your work. Just be able to like throw it up on a screen and use it and basically let somebody else see it, hand the controls to them, use it and validate, is it working how we want? Can you understand how to use it? That's like the lowest hanging fruit. You just install this on your PC and then your existing PC builds will just run this way. And you can use it to either, have internal discussions or external sales discussions. That's for developers, the lowest hanging fruit. I think I'm exploring, other pain points for people that are actually, in the deployed situations, like for example, in education, right? Some of the pain points that I've heard that I'm still, working through initial pilots with, instructors, whether it's like in a teaching environment in K to 12 or in college or in training environments had this fundamental trade-off where like they want to be able to see the class and they want to be able to explain things eye to eye, but like they don't want to be wearing a headset, but they need to be using the VR content to actually demonstrate. And so I'm really interested in like, let's throw your VR experience up on the projector behind you and let you demonstrate. And then you can bring people up to the front of the room and let them take the controllers from you. Just like all of that friction just kind of goes away. And it's pretty easy to get set up. I'm looking at pain points first and then audience distribution increase later. Because it's hard to get people to buy into the idea that 90% of people are going to be using VR this way at the first step, right? It's going to be like, let's solve the pain point and then get the light bulbs to go on, both the users and the developers, and then let them come to their own conclusions about the fact that this could actually increase our distribution. This could actually increase our audience just from first principles, like who can actually use it in the first place. I think that will happen naturally once the pain points are the entry point.
When I first saw your setup in action, I was like, oh, it's like a docking station for your headset. It's in docked mode and off you go.
Yeah, I designed it so that, basically just what you're saying, like go in your closet, find that old Quest 1, maybe Quest 2, blow the dust off, plug it in, put it on your desk and just forget about it. Now you're using that again, but it's not your headset anymore. It's your base station for your controllers. And now the entire OpenXR ecosystem is available to you on your desktop computer using those controllers in contexts where you don't want to wear the headset to do it.
That's a great PSA for anyone that has an old Quest device sitting somewhere gathering dust. Are you planning to support Magic Leap? Because I have a couple of those.
Good point.
I don't know what would be involved, but maybe.
I think like almost none of that is still supported, so it would be it might take some wizardry for that one to happen.
There's actually quite a number of games on Steam that support gamepad that are VR games, because if you remember the early Oculus when it came out was gamepad only. They didn't have touch controllers yet. And so I actually have an additional level of support now where you can use a DualShock controller. And so you plug that into your computer and then it uses the IMU on the DualShock and it gives you head control. So basically you can play all those old VR games. Even if you don't have a VR headset in your closet at the moment, if you have a DualShock controller, and I think it should also work with Joy-Cons, you can start playing VR experiences that support gamepads this way. And because those games were not really designed for like room scale interactions, the just basic 3-dot head turning actually works quite well for them. And if you have a 3D monitor, like an Odyssey 3D, you'll play it in 3D. Or if you have X-Wheels, you can play it in 3D. And so it's just another combination of things that people have that now they can play all this stuff this way.
That's actually
Awesome.
so smart. Yeah.
Like I might need to go try that out.
And I'll credit Nima, who everybody knows in the industry. He basically tipped me up on that. And I was like, that's obvious. I should have did that already.
That's awesome. Now there's a whole bunch of retro games I need to go play. Before we get to the end, there's always one question I love to ask, particularly for those of us who've been in the industry for a long time. But what is a memorable AR or VR experience that you've tried?
I was at SVVR relatively early. And if you remember, do you remember the company 6 Sense? They basically developed the Razer Hydra, which was like the first real 6-dot controllers. This is before CV1 and Oculus Touch. It was the first real 6-dot VR controllers I had tried. I don't think anybody had really made consumer ones, and maybe very few had actually made any in general. And so they basically were electromagnetically tracked. You took them off the dock and they would track freely, right? And I remember trying their demo, and their demo basically they put you in it's probably a DK1 or maybe a DK2. And it was just like a shooting gallery. I remember like using their controller, because before then it was like, we were using just keyboard and mouse, I think, right? We were using keyboard and mouse for the demos. And I remember like folding, the pistol in their little simulator and like literally like looking down the iron sights with my head and like lining it up and like shooting something. And I was just like, that was the most insane thing I've ever seen in my life. Cause I was like used to playing like, these demos on a mouse and keyboard. I'm like, I just literally like was using my depth perception with my hand and like, the track, you could feel the tracking was so good because I could like precisely get it lined up and pull the trigger and it worked. So that one really like stuck with me. Like I was like, wow, I couldn't even wrap my head around that at the moment. I was like, this is virtual reality. Like, right, this is like pretty crazy.
It's those kind of experiences where you understand the kind of power of this technology to stay stuck in your brain. It reminded me of the like Blair Witch Project haunted forest thing we did back in the day, Sophia. And it's like the graphics weren't crazy amazing or anything. It was not crossing Uncanny Valley. This was not anywhere near like a real haunted forest, but it was actually terrifying. It tricked your brain so well. This had things like a boiling pit of blood that you walked a 2x4 across. And it's not like, I don't even know what a boiling pit of blood would look like in real life. I don't want to know. But every single person who did that put their hands out like a little airplane when they walked the plank, and you could tell where they were in the
other.
Yeah, one foot in front of the other, even though you were on flat floor. And where you're like, okay, if this can get that far into your brain and convince you that this is a degree of real, like, there's something about this technology. I think that's what sucks people in. So I'm happy to hear it's not just us that has had these like core memory experiences.
Another really interesting one that I'll just share too that kind of blew my mind was when I was working at Altspace. When we were in VR, we would do our stand-ups in VR, and we had some people that were remote and some people that were literally sitting in the office. And I remember taking a second in one of our meetings when we were all talking to each other and being like, I don't actually know, like, if the person next to me here is next to me or like on the other side of the country. Like, I have no idea. Because I didn't know if that person like was in the office that day or like remote. And it's just like, this is crazy. Like, how is it that like I can be feeling like I'm standing next to you, but I don't know like where you are? And in fact, it's kind of funny because a lot of the stuff I saw at Altspace, it's like the classic VR trap where like I could see these moments like that. And I even saw some of it with our users. And I was just like, this is so transformative that you can feel like you're with other people when they're not physically together. That I was like, this clearly is going to be like this thing that just completely takes over the world. But yeah, I just wanted to share that one too.
Very odd and very difficult to explain without sounding, a little bit crazy to someone who hasn't spent a lot of time in VR. So where can people find you? Where can they connect with you? Where can they find Portal VR?
Sure. So my site is at portalvr.io. It has just one-click download links to all the stuff, versions for PC and Android. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can just look me up there. And, I have email support on my site as well if you want to reach out via email. And I also have a Discord link, so I encourage you to jump in the Discord. That Discord's getting, pretty active now. Lots of people helping me debug things. And I, added support for all these headsets that I don't actually have because they're able to just go back and forth and tell me if it's working yet. I'd love to talk to you about how Portal VR could help, let people use your content or your apps without wearing a headset on their face.
Amazing. And we will link all of those in the description or show notes down below, so you can just click through. And yes, definitely check out Discord. And thanks again, Greg, for joining us today. And thank you everyone out there listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you enjoyed this one, be sure to check out this one next. All right. Bye.
Thank you.